Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. With us, the Ison Brothers at the Ison Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do. Nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. And of course, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us brothers as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. Today we're going to discuss FAA medical denials with respect to, well, back that up, Sally, because we're not talking about denials.
What are you on the first episode?
Yeah.
Yep.
Read the script
It's been
wrong.
so long since we've done this.
Yeah, right.
I'm amazed you even remembered the opening.
Yeah.
Well, it is written down there on this piece of paper.
Little scrap of paper. Little scrap of paper.
That being said, we are here to talk about depression today, so bring it down a notch.
Well, we don't want to get too low.
Debbie Downer over here. That being said, what's the deal with depression?
Why are you looking at Alex? He doesn't know. He can't get legal advice.
Maybe we talk about hair loss treatment if you were talking.
Yeah, there's no treatment for this. We're past any help.
Yeah, this is...
Well,
Maybe a wig.
let's say
That's why I'm depressed.
you'd look good as a blonde. Let's say this. Let's say somebody gives us a call. They want to get their medical, or maybe they already have a medical,
Usually
and
when they
they've
call.
been recently diagnosed with depression.
Recently?
I'm saying recently.
It's your scenario.
This is my scenario.
Use
I
it
can
how
make
you
it.
want it.
It was a recent diagnosis of depression.
How recent?
Let's say within the last 6 months.
Beautiful.
A single episode of depression in the last 6 months due to an episodic event.
Episodic.
So you mean non-recurrent? Is that what you're trying to
That's what I'm
say?
saying. Dude, let's say it was a situation in their
Yeah.
life in the last 6 months.
Did they take a medication? He or she?
No, they just sought counseling.
Sought counseling for the depression. Episodic event.
An episodic event.
Let's go a little bit further. Go off to Scrap of Pepper and ascertain what was the event. Give me a scenario.
There could be any reason a person might have one event, but let's say they had marital issues.
Marital discourse?
Discord.
Discord. I'm sorry.
They were
That's why I'm not
wanting,
allowed to talk.
they were wanting to have a discourse,
Discourse led
and
to
that led to the discord.
That's beautiful.
Okay, so we have within the last 6
right.
months somebody having marital relationship issues. They were depressed. They sought treatment with a therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, psychologist, anybody in between. But now they think, okay, past that stage of my life, everything's a little bit better. You know, we talked it out. Everything's hunky dory.
What was the actual diagnosis given by the doctor?
Well, I'm not the doctor. How would I know?
Well, it's going to make a big difference.
How about
Here's why.
non-recurrent major depressive episode?
That's gonna be a problem.
That's going to be a problem. What if it was an adjustment disorder with a depressed-like mood?
Yeah. Or situational depression.
Right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
I
or
tried to set this
minor
up.
depression. So here's the thing. And so you haven't gone for your medical yet. Is that what you're trying to say?
You haven't gone for your medical yet, or you're going for your next medical, and this popped up in between
Okay.
applications.
Well, I don't think you're going to have a major problem. You know, I know why.
That's not depressing.
Because the FAA has a guideline for AMEs for situational depression, such as your scenario, where if you've had a single
figure.
episode and it's been completely resolved, not requiring treatment for longer than 6 months, or not resolved within 6 months after the resolution of the event stressor, essentially you can still get a medical certificate without having to have a special issuance and so on. And the AME could issue the certificate.
So you go in and you tell the AME about all this stuff, and you're prepared because you've talked to us, and perhaps you engaged us, and we've
Or maybe you
gotten
talked to
everything.
some competitor.
Yeah, well,
That's
what do
probably-
they get? What do they know?
Yeah, right.
We're the only ones that know anything.
Nobody out there is going to be your wingman. In short,
Here come the lawsuits.
in short, You go, you're prepared, you give everything you need to give to the AME so that he can review it. He can look at it in relationship to the AME guideline, and he issues it. Does that mean you're out of the woods per se?
Not necessarily.
Why is that?
And here's the thing. So you're going to go to the AME. In my scenario, maybe it's a woman AME, a she.
Well, either way.
You can get fuss budges or you worry about the generic he.
Oh, my gosh.
Move on.
That being said, if you go into the AME's office and you have a current detailed clinical progress note from your physician who treated you and the actual clinical records, what will happen is the AME should be able to issue the certificate. In doing so, will forward on that detailed clinical progress note and the records to the FAA with the application. And so what will happen there is the FAA should, even despite the AME having issued the certificate, the FAA will then still want to know, or they're not going to just say, oh, well, that's great, put it in your file. They're going to
Most likely.
They'll want to review the records and review the note, and they could even follow up and say, well, hey, this isn't sufficient, perhaps. We want a psychiatric evaluation or whatever it may be. Or they could say, yeah, this is great, and send you a letter of eligibility saying that medical that was issued by Dr. Schmobbity Schmob is valid as issued.
I want to stop for a second. This is Alex's records moment, okay? So, you go to counseling, you have several sessions, they say you're hunky-dory. You got to take those records to your AME for them to review, correct? And to send on to the FAA, just like you said. What if they won't give you your counseling records?
Here's what I would recommend.
Does Alex have some reason he's asking this question?
No, I think it's relevant because counselors typically will not give you the detailed or the lack of detailed notes that they take on your sessions.
Here's what I would recommend. First of all, cut Alex's mic.
Hey, you know what? That was a relevant question. And
what we'll see quite a bit is, therapists or doctors, mostly like psychiatrists, not being willing to provide progress notes for some uncanny reason. They'll want to provide a summary letter. The FAA prefers the clinical progress notes, and I think they will want those, especially if your history is more problematic from an aeromedical perspective. But if all you can get is the summary letter, definitely go for that, and then make sure that it addresses historical symptoms, historical treatment, and your current status, and as well as any treatment that is ongoing. So you're going to try to capture what the history is, because the FAA wants to know for sure, what was your diagnosis and what is that level of risk for recurrent symptoms.
So are they looking, and I believe Dr. Bradshaw spoke to this when we had him on as a HIM psychiatrist, but they're looking for whether or not there's a risk for a recurrence of symptoms that would suddenly incapacitate you.
That's right.
And make you a greater risk to aviation safety than the general public.
I've reflected on that episode, and I've been thinking, what's going to suddenly incapacitate me from a mental health standpoint?
Well, just waking up in the morning.
Look at your face.
Well, it's kind of funny. I think some of the concerns for all of this is people that want to, I think a lot of people kind of see aviation as an outlet and to kind of help them, kind of help clear their mind, and they want to go out and they want to have a hobby. But yet, ironically, what might actually help them is kind of maybe adding to the stress because the FAA won't give them a medical because of their history.
And we understand that. We'll see cases with people with PTSD or otherwise, and they feel as though that, the PTSD is treated by flying for the most part. It gives them a
structure.
A moment of reprieve and so on. But that's not sufficient for the FAA's purposes, as I understand. So that being said, though, let's say, for example, you had the depressive disorder that you identified midway through your medical certificate. You already had a medical certificate. So what you would still want to do is generate the same documentation, and depending on some strategy, you may want to go ahead and proactively provide that to the FAA so as to avoid a deferral, so that the file can get reviewed in time before your next medical application, so as to avoid a deferral.
That's a beautiful thought.
You love that?
Let's say you're under 40 and you're just flying on a third class. So you got 5 years and you just did your medical a year ago. So that means you got 4 years left on your third class medical, but you just got hit with a depression diagnosis.
Got hit with a depression.
I got hit with a depression.
It's like everybody like the news. such and such slams such and such.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In politics.
Yeah. Slammed.
So
everybody's getting slammed.
You got slammed with a depression diagnosis.
Yeah.
And, I got 4 years left on my medical. Well, when that medical comes due 4 years from now, you're going to have to put down on there yes to 18M due to that depression diagnosis.
So there's no mechanism, unless you're on a special issuance or there's been some warning that requires that you go to your AME and identify that you've had some developing medical condition. There's no mechanism which requires you in that 5-year period or any period of time to go to the FAA and say, I've got this condition that's popped that I just got slammed with. Mm-hmm. However, there is 6153.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
It says if you have reason of medical deficiencies, I'm paraphrasing, you should self-ground. So if you have this diagnosis, there's an argument to say, well, hey, listen, I've come up with this condition that maybe I should self-ground. And that's something to consider, and that's sort of a gray area in our business and the bane of our existence. Although I will say...
Maybe you shouldn't say this. How do you know? How do you definitively know this?
Okay, I won't
know
say
where you're about to go with it.
Call in if you want to know.
Call if you want.
863-712-9475. Call Christopher. He'll tell you.
That being said,
you don't need to know.
I'll just say 6153, you should consider that and be concerned that, maybe I shouldn't be flying if I have this new diagnosis.
But it's a self-assessment.
It's self-assessment.
And you got to do it anytime you go flying anyhow.
Yeah, if you went out right now, hadn't been slammed with a diagnosis you got. So that being said,
well, let's talk about the diagnosis that you got slammed.
So I got slammed with this diagnosis. I may want to go ahead and get it out to the FAA, or technically, I report on my next. You definitely need to report on your next medical application,
or maybe in the interim, maybe not immediately, but start positioning yourself through treatment or meditation.
Right. Well,
or whatever.
Especially if you have a more severe level of condition.
Are you okay over there?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Would you stop with the coughing?
I'm trying not to. Okay?
We're talking about important matters of state.
It's not such a subtle.
You're like Donald.
I'm covering the mic. I mean,
it's just a very loud incapacitation.
What was it like? The White House chief of staff there coughed during one of Trump's press conferences, and he pretty much ripped him a new one. You need to leave.
You're fired. That being said, we're using the generic key. We're bringing up 45. We're alienating all sorts of folks. That being said, that being having been alienated, we take all business.
Hey, listen. I mean, if Biden did anything noteworthy to make fun of, I'd say it.
Hey, if you're a supporter of 45 or 46, happy to help. The same
47 and 48.
The same standards of the FAA. So 45 and 46 didn't make any difference. That being said, where were we?
Let's talk about
the more severe conditions.
Yeah, the more severe conditions.
So, okay, you got by with this sort of situational issue. Your wife decides she's going to get back with you, which would be nice for your situation, in your scenario. Just kidding. Loving family, loving marriage.
But now I got an oppressive work environment that I just can't bear to go into day after day.
That's likely the case.
I got a nut job of a law partner. I'm sorry.
We got a 45 supporter. So we got the...
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
The issue here is that you have much more severe depression, sir. And so let's say you have major depressive disorder single episode. Well, now you're in a situation where the FAA is not going to necessarily just wave that through. They're going to want to know, they're definitely going to want to see medical records to ascertain for sure that you didn't have any other diagnosis that they should know about. It wasn't a more severe depression, number one. Number two, it's going to put you in a spot where they may very well want to see a psychiatric evaluation to confirm that that was a major depressive disorder single episode and it wasn't something that's more inclined to be reoccurring, and to ascertain whether or not further mitigation of risk is not necessary. to include potential engagement with counseling or therapy or ongoing psychiatric evaluations.
What are the acceptable ways to mitigate risk in a situation like this?
Acceptable?
Are there acceptable?
I'm not the end all be all here, but
well,
what I would
you certainly don't speak.
What
for
I would
the
recommend.
FAA.
What I would well, certainly
speak to him.
I don't. I speak very rarely, but that being said, the idea is that with single episode, our argument would be, pending review of your records, that there is no risk for recurrent symptoms. It was a single episode, one and done. It's not going to happen again.
Yeah, why would it reoccur?
So why would I need to mitigate it? Obviously, I'm going to be careful. I'm going to be cautious. I'm going to keep in mind that I may be susceptible to increased risk for recurrent depression. But with this particular event, not going to happen again. Not going to happen again. So it's going to put you in a spot where there's an argument to say, well, listen, FAA, there's really no reason to mitigate this any further. Just go ahead and give me my medical, and I'll let you know if anything happens, right? So that's kind of the argument, in a nutshell, the argument. Now, I would also add, may I add this? It doesn't foreclose upon the opportunity for you to potentially be treated with an antidepressant. You could be on have a single episode depressive disorder, and maybe, hey, I feel better on an SSRI. Lord knows I'd probably do better on one. We'll find out after my episodes.
Thank you, Hems.
I don't really have any episodes. You can
this
trust.
week.
You can trust
this week.
So it's one of those things where you could be treated in there. You just had to go through the special issuance process for the SSRI for a single episode. Now, here's where things get really tricky. May I?
You're gonna stop asking permission. You're already.
Well, I'd like for you guys to chime. I'd like for you guys to chime in a little more. It's not the Anthony Ison
This
show.
one over here is coughing up a lung. I mean,
hey,
that's about all you can chime in with.
Well, let me chime in with
so
this.
move on.
Let's say you had recurrent depression.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say you've had more than one episode. Now, what we like to do, we'll go ahead and tell our trade secrets. We like to say, well, is it definitely recurrent depression? Right? So we're going to get all your records. We want to see all your records. And we want to review whether or not you legitimately have this diagnosis of major depressive disorder recurrent.
Why do you have so many hand gestures?
Well, it's because I'm trying to articulate it appropriately. So
for radio, okay.
Listen, if this guy could get up and walk around the room while he's doing this, he would.
Oh my gosh! Imagine how good this podcast is if I could pace while I talk.
Joe Rogan, here we come.
That being said, he'd want to come to us. Yeah. So that being said, maybe they can cut out all of that being saids. But that being said, what we're looking at with major depressive disorder is, one, we want to make sure you really have that diagnosis. Now, what we've done in the past, if you're not taking an antidepressant medication for the recurrent depression, maybe we tease that out a little bit and see, do you really is that a legitimate diagnosis? Because Lord knows, we've seen cases where doctors will just say, major depressive disorder recurrent. And then, they go see the airman goes to see a HIM psychiatrist, and they say, well, not so fast. I don't know that I agree with this diagnosis. So we always want to make sure that, if the HIM psychiatrist agrees with it, especially if HIM psychiatrist, is saying, yes, this is major depressive disorder recurrent. Keep in mind that the trend of the FAA lately has been that the only way to mitigate that major depressive disorder recurrent is going to be with an antidepressant.
Approved
antidepressant. So one of the
can't just get on any old
Wellbutrin.
So. And there's issues there too, though, right? If you've been treated with more than one antidepressant simultaneously,
that's correct.
Let's say you don't qualify for that special issuance pathway, and now you have to basically come off of it, but now you have a potentially untreated issue. So the risk for recurrence is no longer mitigated.
Yeah. So now if you don't qualify,
you're between a rock and a hard place.
That's right. It's like where you're
putting
me. I'm trying to talk over here, and you're putting me up against the wall.
Well, maybe if you would stop trying to interrupt me.
Hey,
get my thoughts out.
Well, maybe we just disband this whole thing. That'd put you in a state of depression. That being said, so
it'd relieve some anxiety.
Yeah.
That's the next episode, okay?
So let's say you have major depressive disorder recurrent. You don't qualify for the SSRI special issuance pathway. Check out that podcast episode. What do you got? What can you do then? Well, at that point, you kind of have to just kind of go at them and say, well, hey, either A, find an argument if there is one that's available as to whether or not the credibility of that risk for recurrent symptoms is really there, or if there's an argument for that, and then maybe you say, hey, listen, I can mitigate this through some other means other than the SSRI treatment with counseling and ongoing engagement with a HIMSS AME, kind of be a little unorthodox, but say, hey, listen, I'll be monitored and evaluated every way to Sunday.
Since I seem to be the idea man around here,
Yeah, man.
I'm going to throw out another scenario.
Oh boy.
You have major recurrent depression.
Yeah.
Major depressive.
We
You have depression. It's recurrent and it's major, right?
We'll talk about cognitive problems some other time.
Yeah. But you've been doing very well recently. You're not on any kind of medications. You don't require medications. But this is a distant thing in the past of a diagnosis, right? And so you gather up all of your treatment records. You go get an updated clinical note from your treating, psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, anyone in between, right? You have a very positive evaluation with a HIMSS trained psychiatrist. They're supportive of you getting a medical. You submit all that, package it up, put a red bow on it, send it to the FAA, feeling good about life because everything's coming up aces for you. And then all of a sudden the shoe drops and you get a denial letter because of your history of major recurrent.
Depressive disorder recurrent.
There you go. That's the one. What happens at that point? Is it the end of the road? Are you completely done or not?
Not at all.
And if we were to look at a regulation on this, what is the FAA going to deny you under, whether it's first, second, or third class medical certificate you've applied for?
It's going to be 67.107, 67.207. You stop mouthing it to me. I know it. I say it every day. 67.107, 67.207, 67.307, respectfully.
Is there a respectfully a subsection within those regulations that they're going to point
C,
to?
okay? We're going to look at C. 67.107C, 67.207C, first class, second class, 67.307C for third class.
Okay.
And so the idea there is that you could maybe then go to the NTSB and suggest, hey, listen, based off this regulation, which requires that the federal air surgeon find that, in proper care and judgment and so on and so forth, that your medical history suggests that you're not going to be a safe pilot, essentially. You can maybe argue, hey, well, despite this diagnosis, there's no evidence that I'm not going to be safe. Now, the problem there is that they're going to come in and land on you like a sumo wrestler and say, well, our policy is that, the risk
Ison Brothers.
Yeah, the risk for recurrent symptoms is just, for depressive disorder is too high and so on. That being said,
but if you've
opportunities,
gone through the process with the FAA and providing them with competent medical analysis and evaluations supporting of your eligibility, it makes it more difficult for the FAA to come in and say that they didn't make an error when they denied you, right? Because isn't that the standard when you go to the NTSB, especially in an issue like this with depression, which is at the federal air surgeon's discretion as to whether or not it should preclude you from holding a medical?
No, I don't want to give you any false hope, though. I can tell you that they're going to say there's recurrent depression or persistent depression. That's another diagnosis. They're going to say, well, you got to be treated with antidepressant to mitigate that risk most of the time. But to your point, if I'm saying, nuh-uh, right, and I've developed a file here that supports the idea that it's not going to cause a problem while I'm flying and it's not going to be recurrent and so on, could take that to the NTSB and see.
It becomes a battle of the experts.
You can try to challenge it. Now, again, I can tell you that the FAA is going to be, we got to be.
Well, sure, that's what they're going to be, but it doesn't mean
you
ultimately has to be that way.
We could
argument.
challenge what they're going to be.
Right. And so my point in all of this was that essentially, as you go through this, you don't want to just be randomly throwing stuff at the FAA because it's going into your airman medical file. Your airman medical file becomes the primary exhibit before the NTSB as to whether or not the FAA erroneously denied your application. And so before it's medical, it's legal. Well, and it's legal throughout the whole process.
It's the regulation they're weighing it against. It's not,
some clinical standards.
Clinical standards, and they're very clear on that. These aren't clinical standards. So I think we see the runway coming into sight here, and we're faster. We're going to coming a little too hot.
Hopefully, we haven't made you more depressed.
Yeah, give us a call. Give us a call. We'll see. We're out at the flagpole.
We'll be your wingman.
Well, you vlogged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer podcast and the random musings of the Ison Brothers. And even though our wives still deny they know us in public, we are the Ison Brothers of the Ison Law Firm. We'll see you next time.
You know, we did this in one take.
It's crazy.
Now you just ruined it.
End it. End it.
Goodbye.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.